We just stepped on their face with a hobnail boot and broke their nose. We just crushed their face.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Glory UGA podcast here on YouTube. I'm Tyler, and as always, this episode is brought to you by our great friends at MyBookie. So make sure to check them out for all your betting needs. If you enjoyed today's content, please go ahead and subscribe to this channel, like, comment, all those things. It's a huge help for us, guys, as we continue to try to grow this YouTube channel. We've been doing the podcast, the audio side of things for 10 years, going on 11 now, but we've just now been getting this YouTube channel going over the last 6 months or so. We're really excited about how things are going right now. We're getting better and better at it, so I appreciate any support that you guys can offer us. Thank you in advance for that. But as for today's show, as promised, I am back with our way too early Georgia football 2025 offensive depth chart projection. We did the defense last week. I know a lot of you guys are able to check that out. I appreciate you guys giving that a watch, commenting, let me know what you guys think. Appreciate it. If you haven't checked that out, please, when you get done with this episode, go back and check that one out. I think you guys will enjoy that. But today, we're turning things over and we are looking at the offense. And look, guys, we all know as Georgia fans, this offense has got to take steps this year. We've got to improve, especially when it comes to the run game. And there's a lot of questions. There are certainly some unknowns on the defensive side of things. We talked about that a week ago. But I think you make an argument there's even more unknown on the offensive side of things. Certainly when it comes to the offensive line, we're losing a number of stars there. It's a lot of moving parts there. We certainly have an idea of who the contenders are, but where will they land? What position? What would the depth chart look like? That is what we are here to talk about today. So let's go ahead, man, and let's dive right into this. On the top, let's start with the most important position on any football team, which of course has to be the quarterback position. There's not a ton of mystery here. We know who the contenders are. Really, there's two guys that, in my opinion, right now, sitting here on January 28th, have a legitimate shot to win the job and be QB1 for the Georgia Bulldogs in 2025. Obviously, Gunnar Stockton, who started the Sugar Bowl against Notre Dame, came back and led that comeback to beat Texas in the SEC Championship game. He right now has to be, I would probably tab him as the presumptive starter, certainly the leader in the clubhouse heading into the offseason as we get closer and closer to spring practice, which I know is not that close. But guys, come on. It's a long, dark offseason. I got to have a little bit of hope here. Gunner's got to be the favorite. There's no doubt there. He's the guy that's been in the system longest. He's the guy that's got the most experience, even though he doesn't have a ton of real meaningful experience at the college level. He's got more than anyone else on the roster at that position. So I think going into spring practice, he's got to be the favorite. However, I am going to have to stop short of guaranteeing you that Gunnar Stockton is going to win the job and be QB1 for Georgia, even to open the season. Because I do think the window is open, might not be wide open, but I do think it's open for sophomore Ryan Puglisi from the state of Connecticut to step in and maybe possibly, I don't know, we'll find out, with a big spring, position himself to have a legitimate shot during fall camp. Because I don't think Puglisi is going to win the job in the spring, but what he can do is put himself in position with a strong rest of the offseason, with a strong fall camp, maybe put himself in position to jump Gunner. Now, he's going to have to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that he is clearly the guy. Because if all things are equal, with Gunner's experience, with the leadership he brings to the table, I'm not saying that Puglisi can't, but we've seen what Gunner can bring to the table in terms of leadership and how the team responds to him. Puglisi is just going to have to show, like, hey, man, like, I am head and shoulders above, better than Gunner. It's no questions asked. Now, will he do that? I don't know. What I can tell you is I love Ryan Puglisi, man. I love everything about this guy. And look, this is not me just saying this right now. If you go back and you listen to our podcast, you can go roll the tape, find it somewhere out there. Coming out of high school, I was big on Ryan Puglisi. Now, he was not a finished product. He's a guy that needed some polish, and he very well still could be in the process of developing as a quarterback and not ready to be the guy yet. That's probably the most likely outcome. But I'm not going to count him out because, number one, he's got the physical tools. At 6'3", 210, he's got kind of the prototypical size there. He's a good athlete. I wouldn't say a dynamic athlete at the quarterback position, but certainly Gunner's level as an athlete and maybe slightly more of an athlete than Gunnar Stockton is. So love that about him. And he's also got a cannon for an arm. Now, he wasn't like Gunner was just a beast at the high school level, obviously setting all those records in the state of Georgia. Basically every quarterback record you could set in Georgia, Gunnar Stockton did it. He had a prolific high school career. Puglisi didn't necessarily have that type of of prolific career as a high school quarterback, but he's got the tools, man. He's got the skill set. I think you could make a strong argument, and I think I would make the argument that Puglisi does have better physical tools than Gunnar, but he hasn't been in the system as long. He hasn't. He doesn't have the experience that Gunnar Stockton has, so he's going to have to, again, prove that he's head and shoulders above better. One thing I do like about Puglisi, love the mental makeup. We haven't seen the guy. That's the thing here. That's why it's such an unknown. We can go back into the high school tape, right? But we have seen none of him at the college level. We didn't even see him at G-Day. He was banged up. He wasn't really working much when I went to the practice during fall camp. So I don't really have much to work with here, really anything at all, when it comes to Ryan Puglisi at the college level. But I have seen enough at the high school level, and just hearing people talk about him and how he's made up above the shoulders from a mental standpoint. I think this guy's got a shot. Again, the window's open. Not wide open, but the chances there. But right now, if I'm predicting like I am right now on January 28th, I got to go Gunnar Stockton QB1 and Ryan Puglisi as QB2. Could that change? Possibly. Right now, that is what I'm going with my way too early quarterback projection for the Georgia Bulldogs in 2025. All right, well, who are those guys going to be throwing to? Man, a lot of options here. Obviously, Georgia, for the third year in a row, has dipped its toe into the transfer portal in a big way at the wide receiver position to address what was arguably the biggest deficiency for this team in 2025. Now, some of that was due to injury, some of it was due to suspensions, some of it goes back to just recruiting misses and not recruiting at a high enough level at that position for a number of years. That came back to hurt us in 2025 or 2024 in a big way. But Kirby Smart clearly knows that. He's known that for a couple years. He's been trying to address it very aggressively in the transfer portal, and this offseason was no different. So let's start with the X wide receiver position, which this is where you want to put your dude, like your alpha. This is where we didn't really have a guy last year. Like, no offense to Dylan Bell. I think Dylan Bell is a very valuable player. He's a playmaker, can do a lot of things for the Georgia offense. He's got a lot of versatility, all those things. But Dylan is not a prototypical X receiver. That's not what Dylan Bell is. He wasn't even supposed to play that position, guys. He was a Z all offseason long, spring practice, most of fall camp, and then you have the rah-rah Thomas stuff, and then Colby Young, obviously. He was dealing with an injury during fall camp, and then he got set back there, and then obviously, you got the legal situation. So by necessity, like, we didn't really have anybody else. It was Dylan Bell. Like, we got to play him there. We can play Arian Smith at Z. You got to play Dylan at X. So he was largely playing out of position. So I don't think, unless we have another crazy situation, that Dylan Bell is going to factor in the X position this year. Now, could he play it if needed? Sure, absolutely. We've seen that. But I don't think he's the guy that we're going to have there this year. For me, right now, going into, I guess we're about to enter February, we'll be at spring practice in a couple of months, I think Noah Thomas is who we went out and recruited for that spot. The guy we got from Texas A&M, I mean, he is, you talk about physically speaking, he is the prototype for that X position. 6'6", 200 pounds, tall, long, athletic, insane catch radius. Now, I know the knock on him is the production, the numbers. You can go back, you pull up his stats, you pull up his game log. You don't see a ton of like massive games. But you also have to factor in what he was playing with at the quarterback position at Texas A&M. It was like musical chairs there. Man, it was Connor Wegman, and he was hurt, and then it's Max Johnson. And Max Johnson, like, come on, man. Like, God bless the guy. He's not a great quarterback. And you got Marcel Reed, who's really athletic, really talented, high ceiling, but very up and down as a passer. So I really believe you got to factor in that context. And go to the tape. Watch the guy on tape. Actually watch their games. And I'm telling you guys, I watch a lot of college football, like I know a lot of you do, and I have seen Noah Thomas play many, many times. And every time I watch him play, even if he's not making a ton of plays out there, when he gets opportunities, you just see him out there running around, making catches, or even like he's targeting, you're like, man, this guy looks the part. He should be a dominant type player. If you go back and watch their bowl game, I know it's a bowl game, they were trying to feature him. At the very least, Noah Thomas is a big-time red zone threat, and that is very much something Georgia lacked last year. You go back to the Sugar Bowl against Notre Dame, you get in the red zone, trying to mount that comeback. We don't have anybody. We're throwing Nitro Tuttle in there when he hadn't played really at all in the Sugar Bowl. We get in the red zone, we want to throw a fade. Well, we're like, all right, well, I mean, he's probably the guy that can go up and get the ball. Like, we trust him as one-on-one situations. They're going to play man coverage, which Notre Dame does a lot. So you throw him in there, you throw him the ball, but didn't work out. Then you're throwing fades to tight ends. Well, guys, look, no offense to Lawson Lucky and Oscar Delp. We're really throwing to Lawson in the Sugar Bowl. They're not Brock Bowers, right? They're not those kind of guys, contested catch guys. Well, Noah Thomas is at the very least that. But I think that's just the tip of the iceberg of what this guy can be. I think you give him the right system with a competent quarterback, some stability there. I think this guy can truly develop into a legit alpha number one wide receiver. So he's a guy right now, if I'm projecting, which is what we're doing here in this episode, I would go with him as wide receiver 1 at the X receiver position. But speaking of Nitro Tuggle, hey, this guy is a really talented player in his own right. Loved him coming out of high school. Extremely athletic, like just crazy stuff he's putting on tape. Didn't see a ton of time as a freshman. Little bit late in the season. You saw him some against Tennessee, and you saw enough to be like, okay, I like this guy. I think this guy can be something for us down the road. And you're hopeful that with another offseason under his belt, this guy can take that step as a sophomore. Now, it was kind of touch and go there for a minute in the early parts of the offseason, right before the bowl game, where he announced briefly he was in the transfer portal, but obviously our coaches think very highly of him, and they fought to keep him, and thank God we got Nitro on the roster. So he's going to factor in. I think Nitro could play X, which he did some last year. He's 6'1", 190, so he's not as big as you would typically look at for your X receiver position. I think he can do it, though. I think he also could play Z. We'll get there in a minute. But I think Nitro's a really talented guy. He's got some twitch to his game that a lot of receivers don't. I think with the ball in his hands in space, this guy can be very dangerous. So now coming into his second year at the college level, kind of gone through the developmental first year, I think he could be poised to make a big jump and contend for snaps at that X receiver position. Now, the wild card at X is Colby Young. We don't exactly know what his status is or is going to be. What we can say for sure is that he is not declared for the NFL draft. So I think he's going, if the legal situation is cleared up, which I think in a couple weeks, at some point like mid-February, he has a court case here in Athens. I think hopefully we'll get that resolved. He's cleared by the Georgetown 9 office, but the solicitor here in Athens is still pursuing charges. We'll see how that goes. I can't tell you, man. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. We know the story with the female involved. She's trying to get the charges dropped. She's withdrawing statements, all those things. I think he'll be okay, but don't take my word for that. We'll see. But if he is cleared of his charges, which I think will probably happen, does he factor in here? I think he's got to. Is he going to enter the transfer portal? I mean, he could wait near the transfer portal in the spring window. Very possible. I'm not going to say that could not happen. It very well could happen, especially now that they've gone out and got Noah Thomas. But there's still a chance that Colby Young could be on this roster. And oh my dear Lord, if we have Noah Thomas and Colby Young on the roster, both these guys, like legit X guys, Georgia's going to be in very good hands at the X receiver position. We're just going to have two guys that we just really didn't have last year. And Colby Young, before he went out with the whole legal situation, I kept saying over and over again, you're like, this is the guy. We've got to get him more involved. He's the guy who can do things that the other receivers we have on the roster right now available to us just can't do. We got to get him more snaps, and the legal thing happens, and then the rest is history. We all know that. So total wild card there, but I'm very high on Colby Young if he gets everything resolved and decides to stick around here in Athens. Another guy to watch, big-time high school recruit, fringe 5-star guy, depending on what recruiting service you look at. C.J. Wiley here in the state of Georgia from Milton High School. I mean, talk about the size. 6'4", long, catch radius, all that stuff. Athletic guy. Only 195 pounds. If there's one thing I would say that's, I don't want to say critical, but one thing I would point out about C.J. in terms of like his ability to make an impact as a freshman, he's thin. Like, he's a pretty wiry guy, 6'4", 195. I think it would be in his best interest to add a little weight, and I have full confidence he will once he gets into our system with Scott Sinclair. I think he'll be all right there. But in terms of just raw athleticism and talent, ability to go win the contested catch, C.J. Wiley can do that, man. This dude is the real deal. He committed to Florida State for a little while. I thought that was weird when he committed in the first place, but ultimately ended up decommitting. And let's be real, we had to pony up to pay to get this guy. It looks like he might go to A&M for a minute. But at the end of the day, the good guys won. And I think as early as this year as a freshman, he could factor in. Another guy that I don't expect to be a really contender at X this year, but I could be wrong because the guy's just a freakish athlete, is Ellis Williams. I know that he was recruited ostensibly as a tight end. He could certainly play tight end at 6'7", 245. But from what I understand, this guy kind of wants to play X, like wants to play receiver. And he can do it, man. He's got the athleticism. Like, I know you get, like, people want to compare him to Darnell Washington. I get it. Tall, athletic, 6'7". But Ellis is 245. Darnell was playing like 275, 280, guys. Maybe even 285 at times here at Georgia by the time he got out of here. Ellis could absolutely play receiver. Again, we'll see what happens. You get him here in practice, get to spring practice, see what happens. But I wouldn't be surprised. Don't be shocked if we get to spring practice and you hear Ellis Williams playing some receiver and not like exclusively tight end. Just putting that out there. Again, don't expect him to be one of the top guys this year as a freshman at X. But talk about red zone threats, situationally, could he play? Yeah, I think there's a real shot there. So that's my take on the X receiver position. Let's go to the Z spot. This is where I think Dillon Bell fits in, man. I do think Dillon Bell is going to get more opportunities at running back this year. I think that will help him in his NFL draft stock, especially with Trevor Etienne deciding to move on. It's been a little thin there. We'll see what happens in the spring transfer portal window. We might go get a guy. I don't know. But Dillon Bell has played there some. I think he can factor in. Dillon is best with the ball in his hands. Is he an elite receiver? Probably not elite, but very good. But Dillon's best with the ball in his hands. I mean, his body type, I always thought, what I always said about him coming out of high school was, he's a receiver in a running back's body. Like he still does. Like he has a thick, like kind of running back type body. So I think he'll get some looks there. We'll see how that goes. But I do think he'll also play some receiver. He's not going to move to running back full time, I don't think. And he is certainly more of a Z than he is an X. He's one of the most experienced receivers that we have on the roster. So I think he'll probably be the guy to open the season at Z. Nitro Tuggle, again, I think it also plays some Z as well. So I would watch for him. London Humphreys coming over from Vanderbilt prior to last season. Now he's got a year in the system. Made some plays. He made some big wow plays for Georgia at times this year. The consistency wasn't always there. Dealt with some injuries at times, which basically everyone on the team did. I mean, who didn't get injured at some point this past year? But London Humphreys, 6'2", 200 pounds, really good athleticism. He could play some X, but I think he's more of a true Z. Another dude like C.J. Wiley in this 2025 Georgia recruiting class. We've had so much trouble recruiting elite receivers in recent years. That changed this year in a big way. Arguably the best receiving class that Georgia's had, I don't know, man, in recent memory. But Taylor Taylor coming out of the state of Illinois, 6'1", 173. I don't think he's an X, but this dude, talk about polished, like an elite route runner, incredibly fluid in and out of breaks, just knows how to play the position. Maybe not the tallest, biggest guy, but can win the contested catch. Man, this dude is just the real deal. He knows how to create separation, man. Like getting open, which is the name of the game at receiver. Yeah, you got to catch the football, but you kind of got to get it open first, right? This dude can do that. So I think he's a smooth operator. I'd like him probably at the Z spot, but he could also play the slot as well. He's a little bit of versatility there. And then another guy to watch in the freshman class, I think he's a little bit under the radar when you talk about guys like Taylor and C.J. Wiley. Landon Roldan from here in the Athens area, North Oconee High School. The dude is just a speed merchant, man. He is legit. All right, he's legit. This dude had to earn an offer. He came to campus here to work out over the summer, and our coaches were blown away by his speed. And this kind of guy, you don't let him leave without an offer. Like, it's just, you cannot let that kind of speed get away. And he's just a really good player, too. Like, he's only 6 foot 180, but if you watch him play, some of you probably watched him in the state championship, this guy is pretty well put together for a guy that's 6 foot 180. He's not like Ladd was. I know the obvious comparison is, oh, he's like Ladd McConkey. Not exactly. I don't think he's quite as fluid as Ladd. I think he's probably faster in a straight line than Ladd was. Not saying something, because Ladd is very fast in his own right. But he's bigger than Ladd was. A lot bigger than Ladd was coming out of high school. Ladd, oh man, Ladd might have been like 160, 165, soaking wet coming out of high school. Obviously, it didn't end up mattering. He got a little bigger and stronger as his time in Georgia went on. But Landon is bigger than him. So I think he could play Z. I think also he could play slot. He might be more of a true slot, but I think he could play Z. If you get him out there and like, dude, this guy's just so good. We got to find ways to get him snaps, get him on the field. Potentially could play some Z there as well. All right, so let's move to the slot receiver. This is where we went out and got another big-time transfer, this time from Southern California. Zachariah Branch, former big-time 5-star prospect, comes over from USC, 5'10", 175, 100% a slot receiver. In fact, a prototypical slot receiver. Now, the knock on him, a lot like Noah Thomas, is like, yeah, dude's athletic, really talented, should be really good, but the production hasn't always matched like the overall athleticism, right? Like the what you see on tape, you see a super athlete, but you don't see a guy that's necessarily putting up massive numbers. Now, I would say his freshman year, he's a freshman. There's some context there. Now, you did have Caleb Williams, all right, but he's still a freshman. This year, you're working with Miller Moss, who got benched a little bit more than halfway through the season, so the quarterback situation wasn't really necessarily ideal there at USC, but he's also a guy that's still learning how to play that position. When he was recruited out of high school, he was an athlete. That's what he was. It's like, this dude is just an insane athlete, crazy levels of athleticism. You got to find a way to get him on the field, but where does he play? He's more of a DB. Is he a receiver? He wants to play receiver, but he had to learn how to play that position, and he made strides at USC, but he's still got some room to grow. So hopefully this year, which is a money year for him, things start to click a little bit more, and he becomes the impact player that I think he has the ability to be. So I think right now, Zachariah Branch got to be the leader in the clubhouse at the slot receiver position. But I don't think he's without competition. He is going to be pushed. A guy that I loved in the 2024 recruiting class, I thought one of the more underrated players in the 2024 recruiting class was Sokovie White. Got a little bit of playing time last year, not a ton. We were hurting at receiver on the outside. But we had some solid options on the inside. You've obviously got Dominic Love and Anthony Evans. I just don't think we ever made enough use of. Obviously, he thought that too, transferred out, and I went to Mississippi State. I think he's going to light things up in that Jeff Lebby offense, which is essentially the deep option offense that they run at Tennessee, more or less. So he's out. Now, with Sokovie White, the playing time is there, right? The path of playing time is more open than it was a year ago. Zachariah Branch is in town, like, he kind of comes in and replaces Dominic Lovett, but you don't have to deal with like an Anthony Evans type guy, right? So I think Sokovie has a legit shot to push Zachariah Branch. And I love Sokovie, man. Like, physically, you look at him, he might not be the most imposing guy out there, but this is what I would say about Sokovie White. The dude is just a football player, man. He has a knack for getting open, for making the tough catch, for getting the tough yards. The dude is just a gritty football player. I loved watching him coming out of high school because, he wasn't a flashy guy. That's not Sokovie's game. But the dude just made plays. That's what football players do. So I definitely am not counting out Sokovie White. Love to see what he's going to do now in his sophomore year. Taylor mentioned him earlier in this 2025 recruiting class. I think he could factor in at slot, as could Landon Roldan. So there you go. That's how I see things kind of projecting here in late January for the Georgia offense at the receiver position. Tight ends. Let's go there. Look, we got, I don't want to say lucky. I'm excited that Oscar Delp decided to come back for another year. I think is going to benefit him. And now going into his fourth year on campus, Oscar, I think, is going to be positioned to have the best year that he's ever had at Georgia. I don't want to say struggled early on. He wasn't as much of a factor in the pass game early in the season, where none of our tight ends were early. But he became more of a factor in the pass game. And I think there's more that Oscar can give us as a pass catcher. He was really kind of like that new age mover, hybrid tight end coming out of high school. We beat him up because we wanted him to be like the Darnell Washington inline type guy when Darnell left. So he kind of had to play that role when Brock is here. And so last year, you bring in Benjamin Urosic. You got Lawson Lucky, who they can play that mover tight end role. So Oscar's a guy that you should want to keep in that position because you kind of groomed him for that. But I think there's more that he can give us in the pass game. I think you'll see him more active in that regard this year. So if we're going to run, let's say we're running 12 personnel. So if we're running 11 personnel, we'll have 3 receivers, we'll have the slot, right? But let's just assume we're in 12 personnel. We got 2 tight ends starting. Oscar's going to be one of them. And right now, I think it's pretty obvious it's going to be Lawson Lucky as well. Did some really good things for us as the season progressed. Love Lawson. Think he's going to be in line for a big year for us next year at tight end. But you also know that Georgia uses a lot of tight ends. Go back and you look at since Kirby Smart's been here, essentially every year he's been here, we're using 3 tight ends. You go back to like the 2021 year, you got John Fitzpatrick as your 3rd tight end, right? Then you go back to Oscar Delp, his first couple years on campus. He's the third tight end. This year, it's Benjamin Urosic coming over from Stanford. So a 3rd tight end is going to play even if we don't have injuries. So I think 1 and 2 is going to be Oscar and Lawson in whatever order, right? You have Oscar as more the inline guy and Lucky as more the hybrid mover tight end role. Who's that 3rd guy going to be? Well, if I had to project right now, I'm going to say Jaden Riddell, who I also love coming out of high school. He's in the 2024 class, was a freshman this year. Just another guy that has the knack for making the really tough contested catch. I think he can be a red zone option for us, really good athlete. I think he needed to add a little bit of weight during this season, and he did that, got bigger, got stronger. And I think he's going to be in line for a number of snaps in 2025. But he's also going to be pushed there. Colton Heinrich, his running mate, who came in the same class, he's a guy that got some run at times. I know our coaches were high on him in spring practice and fall camp, so he'll factor in there. And a guy that I'm not going to count out. I always say that you don't want to be in a position of having to count on true freshmen to make impacts on your team, because I don't think that's a recipe for success on a year-in, year-out basis. Now the transfer portal and NIL, you kind of have to count on those guys more often than maybe you used to. But you don't want to be in a position to count on them. But that doesn't mean these guys can't make plays to help your team out. And look, we already mentioned Ellis Williams. He could factor in. Absolutely, the dude from Camden County, big 6'7", 245 pounds, obviously could factor in. But a guy that I think kind of gets lost in the shuffle because everyone wants to look at Ellis Williams because he's just this freak of nature athlete is Ethan Barbour from Milton. Talk about just a dude that makes plays like Sokovie White. This dude is off the charts, man. Incredibly athletic, strong hands, really polished route runner, just a big-time football player. And look, when you got Oscar Delp and Lawson Lucky ahead of you, Jaden Riddell's got a year of development ahead of you, it's going to be tough to crack the lineup this year. But he's another guy that I'm just not going to count out because this dude is the real deal when it comes to just being able to make plays. And for a Georgia offense that struggled to find playmakers last year, especially in the pass game, if this dude can come in and show that physically he's ready to compete in the SEC in year one, I'm telling you, I know he can go out and make plays in the passing game. And again, for an offense that struggled to find those kind of guys last year, if he can prove they can hold up physically, which I think he probably can, I think he's going to be tough to keep off the field, man. So just keep his name in the back of your mind. I know he's a freshman, so I'm not going to put him at the top there. But I think if he makes some strides during spring practice, he could put himself in position going to fall camp to potentially earn some real snaps in this Georgia offense. Maybe even situationally, but I think potentially to find some real playing time. All right, so we talked about the skill positions, at least the quarterback, the wide receivers. Let's move to the run game. We know this was the issue. Georgia finished 15th out of 16 teams in the SEC in rushing offense, which is, quite frankly, unacceptable. That cannot happen. That's ridiculous, man. That has got to improve. And with the offensive line we had last year, it's hard to wrap your mind around how that was possible. Obviously, we dealt with a lot of injuries there, but we had issues. We got to fix that. But how do you fix that when you lose a number of stars and a number of your best players? Like you lose Tate Ratledge, right? You lose Jared Wilson at center, who I know only played 1 year at center, but that dude is a big-time athlete at that position. So we're going to have to find some guys. Fortunately, we have recruited fairly well at that position in recent years, and I think some of the youngest players on the team were best equipped to play tackle. To be honest with you guys, I think that was where we had issues. The interior of our offensive line was fine when healthy. The edges, that's where we had issues. So let's start there at left tackle. And look, Monroe Freeling is the guy that you've got to look at as the guy. I would pencil him in as the starter at left tackle. And I know there were some high-profile struggles late in the season, especially against Notre Dame with the fumble. I know, man. I know. So I know some of you might be a little like, gun-shy about penciling in Monroe Freeling. But you have to understand, Monroe was dealing with, like, he probably shouldn't have been playing the Sugar Bowl, guys. Like, he was banged up. But he was going out there, gutting it out for us. And, look, I don't want to make excuses for the guy, but that has to factor in, right? I do think, physically speaking, he's probably the best option we have at left tackle. Certainly more so than Ernest Green, in my opinion. Monroe is a better athlete. He was always a great athlete. It was always his greatest skill set coming out of high school. He just had to get bigger and stronger. He had a really good frame. He had to fill it out. He's done that. He's now at 6'7", about 315. But he's just got to continue to improve and polish his game, which will happen with more reps. I think with a full offseason of being the guy at left tackle, I firmly expect to see a much better version of Monroe Freeling. So I do think he'll be our starting left tackle. Could Ernest Green factor in there? He has played there a lot in his career. Sure, he could. I think Ernest is more of a guard than he is a tackle. I just don't think he has the foot quickness to play left tackle, in my opinion. We'll get to him a little bit later on. But behind Monroe, I think Bo Hughley is a guy to watch. He's a big-time recruit coming to high school. We had to fend off Auburn late in that cycle to get him. Hasn't played a ton in his career at this point, but I know our coaches were really happy with how he progressed this year behind the scenes. Heard that from a lot of people I trust here in town. 6'7", about 295, 300 pounds. I would love to see him add a little bit more weight to that frame. But speaking of athleticism like Monroe Freeling, Bo's got that. So I think he's going to factor in there at the left tackle position as well. A guy that I love, I'm high on long term. I just don't know how ready he'll be this year, is Jazar Jackson. Jaw Jackson, the 6'10", 350-pound physical freak who'd been playing essentially semi-pro basketball for a couple years before he came to Athens last year as a late addition to the 2024 class. Fascinating prospect here. Physically, off the charts. His ceiling is off the charts, but he hadn't played football for like 3 or 4 years prior to last year. I do know our coaches were very satisfied with the progress he made in year one. Was honestly, from what I was being told, far better than you would really reasonably expect him to be, considering he hadn't played football in a long time, playing more or less semi-pro basketball. So how much of a jump will he make in year two? I don't know. I don't know. All I can tell you is, physically speaking, the dude has the goods. So I am very curious to see how much of a step he takes here. Because there's a world where if he takes kind of step that's possible, I mean, no one else on the offensive line that, especially that can play tackle, I think can match him physically. It's just a matter of how quickly can you get up to speed from a developmental standpoint. So he's a guy to watch there. Jamal Merriweather is a guy that I think has some versatility, can play tackle, can play guard, but he also could factor in that left tackle battle as well. But if I had to project right now, I'd say Monroe Freeling, Bo Hughley would be 1 and 2 at left tackle for me. Left guard, Micah Morris is going to play one of our guards, left or right. He played some right guard this year when Tate Ratledge went out. Then he went out with his own injury. But he also played a ton of left guard in 2022, kind of rotating there, kind of a platoon situation with Dylan Fairchild. So I think he goes back to playing left guard, filling in for Dylan Fairchild at 6'4", 330. He's 100% a guard. Now behind him, there's a number of options. Jamal Merriweather, he's another guy I've heard that our coaches are really happy with how he's developed behind the scenes, although we haven't seen a ton of him. I think he could factor in at guard there. And a couple of guys that were huge dudes coming into the 2024 recruiting class that didn't really see any playing time last year, Marquise Easley, Michael Ueni, those guys could factor in as well. I think that we're going to have 3 guards that we're probably going to play this year. That seems to be kind of our MO in recent years. So Morris is going to be one of those guys. At right guard, I feel very strong. We'll get to that in a minute with Daniel Calhoun. And then who's that third guard going to be? Is it going to be Jamal Merriweather? Is it going to be Marcus Easley? Is it going to be Michael Ueni? I think it'll be one of those 3 guys. Do we feel strongly about 4 of them? So we rotate 4 guys. Possible, because you don't have a Tate Ratledge guy who's got a spot that's just like, he's got that spot down. The closest you have to it is Micah Morris. So we'll see there. But I think all those guys are going to be in big-time competition going into spring practice, probably into fall camp as well. But if I had to project right now, he's been in the system a little bit longer. I would go with Jamal Merriweather at left guard behind Micah Morris. At center, right now, it's got to be Drew Bobo. I know that freaks some of you guys out. I think Drew's going to be fine. All right, like, is he physically the most dominant guy? No, but you usually don't have to be at center. It's more of a cerebral position on the offensive line. 6'5", 305. I know the Ole Miss game was a bad look for him, but it was a bad look for everyone on the offensive line. So I don't know how much I hold that against him. And again, with another year under his belt and being like the guy at center, getting all those reps, the number 1 offense, I think we'll see the best version of Drew Bobo. So I'm cautiously optimistic there, but I do think he'll probably be the guy to open the season. Behind him, it's looking like it's going to be Malachi Tolliver. Cortez Smith's a guy from Parkview High School coming in this 2025 class, but he's a true freshman. I am not in the business of counting on true freshmen really anywhere, but certainly on the lines of scrimmage. And then a wild card there, could Micah Morris play some center? I know he's repped there at times in practice. I just don't think he'll be the first option. I think he's like, break glass in case of emergency option at center. I think Drew Bobo, Malachi Tolliver would be the top 2 guys at center. At right guard, I mentioned it, Daniel Calhoun, who I can't tell you with 100% certainty that he's going to be the guy at right guard, but I feel pretty strongly about that. Why do I feel strongly about that? Well, he was getting reps in the number 2 offense going back to last season, guys, as a true freshman. When I went to practice during fall camp, he was getting legitimate run with the number 2 offense. Now, he didn't ultimately end up playing much for us at that position. We had 3 guys that we trusted with Fairchild and Ratledge and Morris, but Calhoun's the real deal. Coming out of Walton High School, 6'6", 325, big physical guy, dropped some weight, got himself in better shape. I think he's going to be the guy at right guard behind him. Again, same trio. Jamal Merriweather, Marquise Easley, Michael Ueni, one of those guys at least going to step up and be that third guard, and maybe it'll be 2 of them. We'll just see how that transpires. Right now, again, I would just say Jamal Merriweather would kind of be your flex guard at this point going to spring practice. And then finally, right tackle. This is where I think Ernest Green will probably land. Again, I think he's more of a guard, but we don't have much experience at all at tackle, and we know how important that position is. I don't think he's a left tackle at all. I think it makes the most sense to move him over to right tackle, where you don't have to be as athletic as you have to be at left tackle. When you're more often than not, you're going to be blocking the other team's best athletic speed rusher, and you're protecting our quarterback's blind side, right? So I think Ernest Green will slot in at right tackle. That'd be my projection right now. 6'4", 320, can play tackle. We've seen that. I will say this in his defense. I know it was a bad look for him last year, but he was also really banged up like most guys on our offensive line, and he missed the back half of the season. So he was playing hurt, and for a guy that's not the most athletic guy at left tackle anyway, when you're banged up like that and you're not practicing much, you're kind of out of shape. You saw he got too heavy. He gained too much weight. I think he'll slim back down and be in better shape this season when he's hopefully, fingers crossed, not dealing with injury. So I would project him right now to be our starter at right tackle, and then the same guys I was looking at being contenders at left tackle, Bo Hughley, Jazar Jackson. I think they'll be in contention to be in the 2 deep behind Ernest Green at right tackle, with Bo Hughley probably ending up being that flex tackle. The guy can play left or right. If a guy went down at tackle, he'd be the first guy off the bench, in my opinion. So that's how I see the offensive line shaking out here on January 28th. And finally, let's get to the running back position. We know Trevor Etienne has exited stage left. A little bit of a surprise for me there. But hey, Best of luck to the guy. Hope he does well at the Senior Bowl and finds himself in a good situation in the NFL. But he is no longer a factor for the Georgia Bulldogs. Nate Frazier is the guy. It is going to be Nate Frazier season in Athens next year. I know a lot of you, that is music to your ears because you were clamoring for that all season long, which, in all honesty, so was I. Guys, look, I saw Nate Frazier. I went to practice last fall camp, and I came on here on this YouTube channel. You can go back and watch it. I don't know why you'd want to now, but it's out there if you want to double check me and verify me. I came here on this very podcast, on this very episode, or this very channel, in this studio, and told you guys the one player that stood out to me, that flashed to me more than any other player on the entire team out there, was Nate Frazier. I was blown away by him the first time I saw him at the college level. I loved him coming out of high school, number 2 running back in the country, coming out of Mater Dei High School in California, big-time high school out there. But seeing him in Athens at that practice, I was like, uh-oh, this guy is going to be a problem. And then sure enough, week 1, Etienne's not playing. He doesn't get a lot of opportunities right away because you're trying to get the ball to Branson Robinson. But when Frazier got some opportunities in the second half, he breaks the game wide open. And it really was one of the big reasons why we ultimately ended up pulling away from Clemson in that week 1 matchup in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. So it's Nate Frazier season, baby. He's got to clean up on holding the football, all those things. But he is a physical runner, very athletic, very, very twitchy. Love the guy. Cannot wait to see him be running back 1 here in Athens. Now behind him, that's where it's a little bit fuzzier, right? Roger Robinson and Branson Robinson are both coming back off season-ending injuries. How healthy will they be? I don't know. It's up in the air. We'll see. Let's just assume they're both healthy. Let's assume they're both healthy. And now Branson's another full year removed from the injury, so he should be back hopefully as close to the old Branson as you're going to see. It's kind of like, remember Nick Chubb coming back off injury in 2016 when he came back off the injury? He was good. He was solid. He was productive, obviously, but he wasn't the Nick Chubb we saw pre-injury in 2015 or 2014. He certainly wasn't Nick Chubb we saw in 2017 when you're 2 years removed from injury. So Branson will be 2 years removed from injury. So I'm hopeful that we'll get back to seeing like legit dude alpha Branson out there. We'll see. But I'm also really high on Rod Robinson. I know he had a really good offseason last year. I hate that he had to deal with the injuries that he dealt with because I think he was in line to have a big breakout year for Georgia. I think that very well could carry over to 2025. So that's going to be a fascinating battle between the Robinsons and who's going to be the number 2 dude behind Nate Frazier. If I had to project right now, I'm going to go Rod. I'm going to go Rod Robinson. He doesn't have as lengthy of an injury history as Branson does. So I think it's a safer bet right now, although Branson can certainly end up being that guy. But Rod also brings a little something extra to the table at 6'1", 235, a bigger back, a little bit of a different speed there. So I would project him right now to be the first guy off the bench behind Nate Frazier at running back, but it could be Branson Robinson. You can't forget about Cash Jones, who's more of a situational guy, third down packages. Obviously, an awesome option, a big-time weapon out of the backfield on third downs. He came back. I think that's an underrated return for Georgia this year. Love what Cash brings to the table for us. So he'll be in the backfield situationally. And then Chauncey Bowen's another guy, a bigger back, kind of in the vein of Rod Robinson, 5'11", 225. We saw him some this year. We had some injuries at the running back position. But I just don't think right now I can project him to be ahead of Rod Robinson or Branson Robinson if those guys are healthy. So I'm going to go Nate Frazier. And tentatively, Rod Robinson in the 2 deep there, with certainly Branson Robinson like right there knocking on the door. But it'll be fun to watch, guys. We'll see how things play out during the spring. And then, of course, later on the offseason, much later, unfortunately, we'll get into fall camp. And we'll have you guys covered all off season long. But there you guys go. There you have it. That is my way too early 2025 Georgia football offensive depth chart projection. I appreciate you guys checking things out here today. Again, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe to this channel right now so you have everything loaded up straight to your feed. Like, comment. Appreciate you guys. Check out the Glory UGA podcast for full episodes wherever you get your podcasts. But for now, I'm Tyler. I'm out of here. And as always, go Dogs!
Man, is there going to be some property destroyed tonight. 26-21. Dogs on top.